We have some phenomenal panelists today who have, within their respective jurisdictions, have rolled out similar statewide, regional-wide portals, websites, virtual hubs, whatever you want to call them, legal resource finders that help low-income, marginalized communities get access to critical legal services. So without further ado, I want to introduce our first panelist, Jennifer Simmons. In North Carolina, we have Rochelle. Hey, Rochelle. And Rochelle's in Massachusetts, if I'm correct. We'll give our panelists a time to introduce themselves and their work. And then Jay Singleton over in Minnesota. So we have the different coasts represented. And again, my name is Miguel Willis, innovator in residence and lecturer of law at Penn Carey Law School in Philadelphia, PA. And I will let the panelists provide, I guess, further introductions. Thank you so much, Brandy, for setting the context of this discussion today. Again, for our audience members, students in the audience, if you have questions, please answer them, ask them in the chat, raise your hand. We will hold space for those questions at the end. So definitely please engage our panelists and I as we engage in this discussion. So I'll kick it off to Jennifer. If you want to introduce yourself further and your work in North Carolina.
Yeah, thank you so much, Miguel. And thank you, Brandy, for the invitation to be here. It's really my pleasure to come and talk about the North Carolina Legal Resource Finder. I work with the North Carolina Equal Justice Alliance, which is the roundtable coalition of the civil legal aid community here in North Carolina. And the Legal Resource Finder is a tool that we've put online to solve a really specific problem, which is we had a lot of people coming to our website. The local courts, the North Carolina court system, if you clicked on the button that said you wanted free legal help, it sent folks to our website, but our website really wasn't designed for that purpose. And so all we really had was a static list of providers, and it wasn't particularly helpful for somebody who was trying to figure out who or what organization might be able to help them. So our goal in developing the Legal Resource Finder was to connect people who have legal problems with the right source of legal help at the right time. It is not an intake system. We are not actually collecting any personally identifiable information. We're just helping folks triage themselves. In other words, we're trying to be a smart source of tailored referrals. I would be remiss not to acknowledge and mention that Rochelle Hahn, who's on the call with us here, was really the source of so much of the work that we're doing here. So you're going to see some close similarities when she talks about the Massachusetts Legal Resource Finder. But I think one of the things that's wonderful about our community is how we can iterate and kind of stand on each other's shoulders. And so she was good enough to share the development work that they had done with us. And we've developed some further enhancements that we hope may be helpful that can be circled around and benefited from that community too. And so again, just a really great way that the community collaborates together across state lines even sometimes. So really briefly how it works, I think she's going to give you a demo that'll actually be probably a little bit better than this description. But essentially, a user comes in, they describe their legal problem, and then they also describe factors that might influence their eligibility at various legal aid provider as they sort out who is and isn't eligible for their services. Then the system produces what I've referred to as a dynamic flyer of information that's relevant to their specific set of facts. And that flyer includes potential sources of help that's unique for their particular situation. The types of legal help that we include in the North Carolina Legal Resource Finder are threefold. First, we refer people to nonprofit legal help. And again, because that flyer is dynamic, it only includes providers that would make sense based on the type of legal problem the person's facing and their particular eligibility criteria. So it's not going to give people names of providers that simply don't work in that particular area of law, or if the person looks to be over income, it's not going to include a provider that would be that's going to say no right off the bat to their inquiry because of their income or other eligibility criteria. So it refers to a nonprofit. We also include neutral, reliable sources of legal information online. So websites that have particularly tailored legal information for the person's situation. And then the third is we also include events that offer either information or pro bono assistance that would be tailored again to the particular legal problem that they've put in. I think there's several benefits for nonprofits that participate in this, and I can go into these in greater detail as we go through the structured questions, but I'll just mention right now, a benefit for nonprofits that are participating in this is that some of the inappropriate callers that would normally clog up their phone lines are going to be filtered out, which of course in turn makes it easier for people who have timely problems and relevant problems to the work of the organization to actually get through phone lines. Um, Nonprofits are able to specify the procedural setting of a situation when a when a person should call a person should make an inquiry about whether they could get help. So for example, if it's a housing situation, a nonprofit can say, don't refer them to us before a complaint is filed, or don't refer them to us after a final judgment is entered, so that you're really getting people to call you at the right time of their particular case procedurally. Another key factor for nonprofits that participate is that it's not too time consuming to either set up their entry in the system or to maintain it. We've done a good degree of handholding for organizations, and then we do regular outgoing check-ins to make sure or to ask whether anything has changed in the organization's intake protocols. And then the last thing I'll mention as a benefit for nonprofits, as well as for funders within our state, is that this is a source of information about people's legal problems. By no means is it comprehensive, but it does give us some analytics about what the trends in legal issues that of people coming to the website might be. We can tell where they're from and who they are to some degree in terms of their income or other demographic criteria and what types of legal problems those people are facing. So that's a real interesting source of information. I think our funders have been particularly interested in that aspect of the Legal Resource Finder. So I'll rest there, Miguel. Thank you.
Oh, you're very welcome. Rochelle, if you want to, actually, Jay. I know Jay is at Minnesota Legal Help, and I know we had the pleasure of working with them for several years through the Access to Justice Tech Fellows Program, and really intimately know the work that they do across their statewide website. So I'll let you take it away, Jay.
Perfect. Thanks, Miguel. Yeah, we'll take a detour to the Midwest real quick. So my name is Jay Singleton, and I'm the program manager at Minnesota's Legal Services State Support. Just to give you a little background on my office and where our virtual hub sits. Our office was created to increase coordination and reduce duplication across different legal aid organizations back in the 80s. And we are funded primarily through state funding. We do get some amount of funding from some of our regional legal aid partners as well. So our virtual hub is centered on our website, lawhelpmn.org. And there's two main features on the site. The first is we have a large library of self-help legal information that's focused on the types of legal topics that our partner legal aid organizations see most often. And everything is written in plain language and meant to be very understandable for folks who don't have a legal background. So a lot of translation from legalese to language that everybody can understand, hopefully. All of our information is currently translated into Spanish, Hmong, and Somali for the self-help information. The second body of, or the second type of information that we have is information about services that are available to folks, and specifically legal services. We've drawn a bright line between legal services and social services, because we wanted to be cognizant of our capacity to keep information up to date and felt like we didn't have the staffing to be able to provide up-to-date information about social services. So that information is kept in a structured database so that when somebody comes to our website, similar to what Jennifer describes, we have an interactive tool that you can use to find both that self-help info and the referral information that is tailored to a person's specific legal issues as they've described them, as well as their eligibility criteria. So a little background on how we got here. The website Law Help has been around for quite a while. I believe it was first started in the early 2000s. But we underwent a big redesign that we launched in 2019. And that redesign was spurred in large part from 2 reports that were released in 2017. And I can throw links to those reports in the chat in just a moment. But the first was a Justice for All strategic plan through funding from the National Center for State Courts that looked at how can we make sure that everybody is getting some form of meaningful access to justice, including that gap of folks that you'll often hear about who don't qualify for legal aid services, but certainly can't afford to hire a private attorney. And then the second report was an analysis of the civil legal aid intake infrastructure in Minnesota, which was a report that specifically looked at Minnesota's intake procedures as a statewide system. And one of the key findings in that report was that there was a lot of bounce from organization to organization. So if you called the legal aid in Minneapolis, and they couldn't help you, that legal aid might refer you to the legal aid over in St. Paul, Minnesota. And then that organization might refer you to the volunteer lawyer organization that serves the metro area. And maybe none of those organizations would ever be able to help that person, but there wasn't good information that intake staff had access to about the current priorities of their partner agencies. So people were getting bounced around a lot. And if you also imagine the long wait times and hold times and different intake hours that organizations have, you can imagine how frustrating that must be as someone just trying to get help for your problem that is probably a very critical problem. So in response to that issue that was raised through that report, our Minnesota State Supreme Court, which is the body that commissioned this report, they gave a directive to legal aid organizations in Minnesota to create a coordinated intake system where organizations would be aware of what each other were doing. And we now have a system where there's a statewide phone number, and we have 4 regional organizations that will screen calls both for their own services and for services that the person might be eligible for at a different organization. And I bring that in because that system is really powered by that structured database of legal services that we have. We have a password protected version of that database that's in Law Help, but you need a password to get to the more detailed version. And that's what our intake staff use when they are making those referrals and those decisions. So with that, I will pass it back to you, Miguel. Thanks.
Thank you, Jay. And Rochelle Hahn is our last presenter, who is over at Massachusetts. I know you have something to share with us as well, so I'll let you take it away.
Great. Hi, everybody. Good. Thanks for having me. So yeah, my name is Rochelle Hahn. I work in Massachusetts. I am the director of the Massachusetts Legal Aid Websites Project, which is housed at the Mass Law Reform Institute. And similar to Jay, we are a legal services backup center, support center. We do a lot of advocacy on legal issues. And then we also house our websites project. Our websites project we now currently run 5 websites. Mass Legal Help, which is our legal information site. We house Mass Pro Bono, which is our pro bono website. Mass Legal Answers Online, which is the Massachusetts location of the ABA's Free Legal Answers project. Mass Legal Services, which is a website for poverty law advocates, And we also house the Massachusetts Legal Resource Finder, which is the tool that I'm talking about here today. So Jennifer did a great introduction for the Massachusetts Legal Resource Finder, because as she mentioned, there's a lot of similarities, but I'm going to try to share my screen and have you take a quick look at what it looks like. Great. Awesome. So just by way of background, the development of the Massachusetts Legal Resource Finder was underwritten by two technology innovation grants, initiative grants, TIGs. The first one was back in 2012, and that was used to develop the first iteration of the tool. And we launched that in 2014. And then there was a second TIG in 2018 to Community Legal Aid in Massachusetts. And we worked with Community Legal Aid to do new development and new functionality on the Legal Resource Finder, including adding an AI-powered natural language search and a redesign. And ongoing support of the tool is provided by our IELTA funder, the Massachusetts Legal Assistance Corporation. So in common with many of the other triage tools, including the folks on the call today, the goal for our site was to give people in Massachusetts with civil legal needs targeted referrals to free and low-cost places that might be able to provide legal help. And we're also trying to direct them away from the programs that can't help them, whether it's because of their income or their geography, or critically, the priority of cases that they're handling. And then in addition to the legal referrals, legal help referrals, we also provide targeted legal information about their issue. So similar to Philadelphia, Massachusetts is very fortunate to have a very rich civil legal help ecosystem. We actually currently have over 60 programs in our database. And there are also quite a few private bar lawyer referrals services as well. So some of the choices that we made in Massachusetts were influenced by the breadth and diversity of this landscape. Our site includes the core legal services programs, as well as other nonprofits and government agencies that provide legal services at no or very low cost. One of the factors, and as I'll talk about, we are not an intake. Our tool doesn't do any intake. We do just referrals, and that's in part because there really wasn't one single intake platform that all of these programs used. So I'm just going to quickly demo a search. If you came to the site, the first thing we ask is, are you in Massachusetts? That was one of the lessons we learned on our first iteration, which didn't have this screening, is that a lot of people, they just don't pay attention to the state or the jurisdiction when they do these searches on Google. So there were people outside of Massachusetts who were using the tool, and it wasn't helpful for them. So once you clarify that you're in Massachusetts, you can either choose to put text in this box, or you can pick an option from one of these choices tools. I'm going on the family law track. And once you go on, pick one of the topics, you have these terms. And the terms that we selected, that we created, and we did this in conjunction with intake staff throughout the state, we focused on terms that both screen people in to cases that legal services programs want to take. And we also chose terms that we knew people were asking about that actually were not priorities for legal services, to try to redirect them away from legal services. And it was, challenging to come up with a list of terms because you're balancing competing interests. On the one hand, you want the terms to be fairly granular. You don't want to just say family law, because then you're just too way overbroad. But on the other hand, we don't want to stretch the interview out for too long. And also, these are not legally trained people who are using this tool. So there's just a limit to how much people, how far people can drill down. Anyway, I'm going to go on a path where someone is trying to get a divorce. So this is the divorce. And this is, we ask whether or not they have children, because that's a pretty critical factor for intake eligibility in our state for family law cases, the stage of the divorce, and then also whether or not there's been domestic abuse, because again, that's a key intake factor. And in this case, I'm going to say no, there's no abuse. You then come to the place where you put in basic eligibility information, household size. I'm going to pick and income. And this is a dynamic, this is tracking different poverty law levels. And then these numbers change depending on the household size. Again, we kind of went to an option where instead of our original site had people typing in numbers, and that led to a lot of user error. So now we have, where people have to just select from a list. We ask about age, because again, that's a key eligibility factor. And then we ask also what their town or zip code is. Once you start typing in words, it's only towns in Massachusetts or zip codes in Massachusetts. And our level of granularity for geography goes down to the zip code level. And then there's one final screen where people can optionally pick some additional demographic factors, like, again, asking questions about domestic violence, veterans, mental health, or you can skip the question, which I'm doing here. And then it's giving us, these are the results that people get. So you can see there's 6 programs that might be able to help. This is a legal pro bono project, a law school projects, an advice clinic, our Mass Legal Answers Online. We include the court service centers in Massachusetts because they do a lot of one-on-one client work. And then also we have a pro bono project, the Dial a Lawyer project. All of these, because I selected that there was no domestic violence, we had 6 programs that showed up. If I had chosen that there was domestic violence, additional programs would have displayed, 10 programs would have displayed. People can download or email these results to someone else. We flag the lawyer referral services if you can pay someone to hire a lawyer. And the other thing about this, is that if, let's say I want to find out more about the Volunteer Lawyers Project, I would click the more info. You see here, they have an online intake screening system. So you could go right to their online intake tool. The other thing that you get in the results are the information. So a lot of our information, similar to what Jennifer said, is going to Mass Legal Help, which is our statewide legal information website. And we also have we refer often to the courts. So that's basically our tool. In addition to the search tool, we have it in English and in Spanish. There's also a general program listing that people can use if they don't want to use the individual search. This, I think, is more useful for community advocates. There's some basic filtering, like, oh gosh, what is the info? I know there's a program in Lynn, I can't remember its name. You could filter by service area. And then we also list a number of lawyer referral services on the tool. So that's the basics of where we are. Some additional considerations that we had when we were developing the tool. Again, this is referrals, not intake, and that definitely influenced the design. We intentionally made it so it's very quick to get through, and we don't ask for a lot of too much information, and things like the financial eligibility is a rough cut. And I think one of the reasons that was important to us is that a lot of people who are using these tools are not going to end up with a legal aid referral. And so it seems unfair to ask a ton of information up front, and have them spend 10 minutes doing this if in the end they just, don't get what they thought they were going to get. And so we leave the more detailed screening if someone is actually doing an intake at a legal aid program. And then, as Jennifer said, I do view this as an ongoing legal needs assessment. I think it's also particularly interesting because a lot of the terms include cases that are not generally taken by legal aid. So we're getting some data, like, family law. A lot of our programs focus on domestic violence survivors, but actually, wanting divorce if you're low income without domestic violence is probably, the divorce with or without children is probably some of the very top terms that people use, or problems with their neighbors, which legal services doesn't take. That's a popular selection. And I'd say that we have a complex delivery system in Massachusetts, so that influenced the complexity of the tool. And I'd say that our biggest challenge is keeping it updated at this point, because you really are relying on some individual in a local program to make this their priority, and they have a lot to do. So, and when we originally designed the program, we thought, you know, everyone can keep their own listings up to date. So we thought people were going to be constantly doing this in real time. They're not. You know, we do ask, you know, we do remind people monthly or every couple of months to update their listings, but you know, and the way I phrase it to people is, if this is going to be a real, you know, waste of a client's time to call you, please take this, please close your listing. If it's something where they call you and they're going to get some kind of information and some kind of guidance, even if you can't end up taking them, so that it was worthwhile for them to call you, then okay, you know, you can keep your listing open.
Thank you, Rochelle. I really appreciate that demo. Yeah, you know, I'll start off as we look to kind of launch our virtual hub. I say our, I'm speaking on behalf as an advisory member for the Equal Justice Center at the Bar Foundation. We seek to incorporate a lot of the features, and you know, our goals align a lot in terms of consolidating the information of the different orgs, having a centralized intake or referral. And so what has been the impact of these models in your respective jurisdictions? And have they helped to address some of the problems that you mentioned in terms of, I know Jay, you mentioned some of the redundancies and referrals, providing you know, more access to people who had no access, and you know, providing that single door approach to people in need and during crisis. So I'll give that, if anyone wants to take a stab at it. I see Jennifer.
I'm happy to talk, but I actually think Jay would be a great first response to this, because I think the coordinated intake is really a degree further in terms of impact than the referral tool that we have.
Yeah, I can speak a bit to the impact of coordinated intake. And I think I'll say the jury is still out a little bit. We haven't come back and done the full study that we did to launch the project. We have a little bit of data because everybody is using the same case management system to transfer cases to each other. And we do see that cases are being transferred and accepted. The most challenging aspect in our system is if the receiving organization who's getting the referral isn't able to like be on the phone with the person right away, it's hard to make that callback connection, which you hear about a lot also with online applications, is getting that callback option and connection with the person is really challenging. I do think there are good solutions out there that we're hoping to pilot in the coming year. Most, I think, promising is callback scheduling, where when somebody gets that referral, they get to schedule a time. And so they know to be expecting that phone call. So the other thing I wanted to mention is that one thing to be aware of if you take this approach is we do see people who, you know, are understandably in desperate need of legal help. They will try every single channel that we've provided. So we have multiple ways to apply online. We have the statewide phone number. Organizations still have their direct phone numbers. So it has required like even more coordination than I think we understood it would, because organizations at different, or intake staff at different organizations are not only taking that like official coordinated intake referral, but they're also saying, oh, this person already applied with us 2 other ways, making sure it's the same person. And I think that that is a smaller subset, but it does take up, it is a big concern for intake staff who are trying to navigate through that. And so I think that comes along with having more entries, is people will use those entries because they really, really do need help. So not a super satisfying answer, but I think it does create more access, but it also creates plenty of work. Yeah.
Thank you. And I know some may think, oh, when developing or launching these hubs, oh, there's just another tech tool, and there's another shiny gizmo. And so I definitely want to understand, how does this work? How does this work complement the role of legal services, and not be duplicative of various efforts at the individual organizations level?
Yeah, I'm happy to take a stab at that, and I'll maybe rope in a little bit of a few comments from the earlier question as well, Miguel. I think that I want to acknowledge the reality of the nonprofit experience. I think one of the things I'm all too aware of as a former attorney at one of the legal aid providers, and also working closely with the coalition of the providers, is that there are not enough resources to go around for people that need legal help. And I wish our state was as rich with providers as Massachusetts is. We have, I'm very excited to have, I think we're at 13 nonprofits entered into the Legal Resource Finder now. But there's not a whole lot of other providers with any significant volume of legal help out in the community that we haven't roped in yet. So it would be inaccurate to describe it as a panacea. We can't produce legal help for people that doesn't exist. But I do think we're doing a couple of important things. One, I hope that we are reducing, and we're actually getting ready to do user testing in about a month. So my hope is that we're reducing frustration for people that are experiencing enormous stress. Almost any legal problem you come to the internet with, you're in some sort of turmoil. It may be different in degrees, but if we can provide information to make a person's experience, we've all been on Google. Shucks, I was Googling trying to find a vacuum repair place in Raleigh recently. It can drive you crazy when you're just looking at the list of possible sources. You're like, is this even real? I don't know. Is this a paid place? Is this not? Not relevant to the vacuum repair. They were all paid. But it's the idea is that we're streamlining it and making that process easier for people that are already in difficult times. And then the other thing I was going to mention is when we rope in self-help tools into that process, I think we're offering a variety of different types of legal help. So I know something that I heard Jay reference, and Rochelle as well, is the idea that there are going to be a good number of people using the tool who actually are not eligible for one-to-one services. So while they're in there talking about their legal problem, can we connect them with the resources that exist? Again, reliable resources that are regularly maintained, that can at least give them some information to potentially effectively access whatever the resolution to their problem is. But it can't be a panacea for resources that just don't exist, unfortunately. But I do think it improves the experience.
Thank you.
Yeah, and to add on to what Jennifer said, I mean, I do think that one of the values of this tool is that you have this overview of the system as a whole in your jurisdiction, in addition to and also for users who are using it, when you get the results, like some of the results for us, are online intake. Some of them are telephone calls. Some of them are walking in person to go into the court. So users get to choose, what access point they prefer. I think these also tend to amplify some of the smaller programs that people might not know about, like our bar, the Mass Bar Association in our state has this telephone call-in system once a month. There's still a lot of legal aid lawyers that don't know that exists. So by adding it, into these tools, you're able to really give a boost to some other resources that are useful for people, in addition to the program that maybe everybody's heard of, and their instinct is to call Greater Boston Legal Services no matter what, even though Greater Boston Legal Services isn't able to handle every single kind of case. The other thing I'm just very aware of, and this is just one piece of the puzzle. By definition, these tools are for people who have some facility with the internet or their phones, or working with a provider. I think this tool is very helpful for social service providers. I know that this tool doesn't work for everybody, and there's plenty of people that it's not a great access point. But I think that's okay. I think you could have something that helps, a subsection of your group, because if we can have some people at least using this tool instead of, picking up the phone and waiting on hold, then you've directed at least some of your usually often not great intakes away. And especially since I know that at least a lot of legal services programs, they're also getting their clients not just from the general public, they're getting their clients because they have relationships with community providers, and there's an access point there, or the legislators are calling. There's a lot of people who are getting it. There often isn't even that much room for just the general public to get into our legal services systems.
Yeah, one more point I was going to make, Miguel, about how the how our legal resource finder complements the work of the existing civil legal aid community is that in reflecting on the unfortunately under-resourced nature of the nonprofits, I do think that this is a form of outreach that they just don't really have time to provide. I mean, it's the reality that going out to the community and doing community fairs and speaking in public places and making one-on-one connections with social services providers, like Rochelle mentioned, even touching base with a private bar sometimes can simply feel unrealistic when your caseload is, piled feet off your desk, right? And so the ability of this is a way to help, again, kind of help folks with the right kinds of problems get in the door at the right time. My hope is we're filling a gap, and I believe we are filling a gap that the providers simply are, overwhelmed, too overwhelmed to actually go out and do themselves in person.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And just to follow up on that, how has that work shifted in the last recent couple of months? I know with threats and the dismantling of benefits across the board, with executive actions that threaten safety, security of our most vulnerable populations and immigrants. How has that work changed, evolved, or how are we responding, I guess, to these urgent and crisis-like times right now? And I think the budget, or Congress, has gone to they're passing their budget right now to completely eliminate some critical benefits. So I know there could be even more inundation of community needing resources and needing critical legal support. So has that platform, are those resources evolving to address this current need?
I don't have a deeply satisfying answer for you, which is the honest truth is I haven't really done the analysis of any kind of change in services or inquiries over the last month. I do have a couple responsive parts of this. One, I'll just acknowledge a weakness for North Carolina, which is that we didn't have funding to translate our legal resource finder. We've only been launched a year. We launched March 1st of 2024. And so we got funding in 2025 to translate it into Spanish, and I'm really excited that we're going to be able to extend our work to reach that community of deeply impacted individuals who primarily speak Spanish as their first language. The other opportunity that I do think the Legal Resource Finder has to be responsive, and I'm going to be honest, it's not been leveraged yet with this particular issue at the front of mind, but we added a news banner to the opening page of the Legal Resource Finder. And so it's a way, we're trying to use it very intentionally to get information about current events out to the public. So one example is during the Affordable Care Act open enrollment period, we had a direct link to the primary navigator grantee here in North Carolina without somebody having to go through the full process of going through the website to see who might be able to help them with that area. It just was on the very front page. We also had a major natural disaster in Western North Carolina when Hurricane Helene came through with the floods, and we had a banner item directing people who were impacted by that directly to the providers that offered support for that, so that, again, it was right on the front. And I think the application that's maybe exciting to me here would be if there are either particular issues that we know significant numbers of the public are facing, that they would be able to get that direct access. Or sometimes I think one of the realities of legal services life is that some folks may not realize that the problem that's fundamentally affecting them is a legal problem. So something like, I'll take SNAP or what used to be called food stamps as one example. People don't really, they think about that as a social services problem, not necessarily a legal problem. And so if we've got resources, if we have somebody that's working in our state on a class action, if they're just looking for clients of a particular profile, we have the capacity to describe that problem as in this front banner and have that opportunity to get the word out to more people, whether they're there looking for that particular situation or not. So I think that's one way that I hope we'll be able to be responsive as things shape up over the coming months.
And I'll say, from our end, we're trying to respond to these challenges, I'll put them, primarily through the self-help information that we create and curate. So during COVID times, there was a lot of changes in the law as well, and we developed an informal network of kind of, I think of them as like phone a lawyer expert friends at different partner agencies. So for this time, we've kind of formalized that process. So we have designated someone and asked and gotten someone in each kind of area that we think is likely to have law changes coming rapidly, who has agreed to kind of be our phone-in expert. And so then we have staff who are assigned to check in with those folks regularly and or when things come up in the news, so that we can update resources. We have a similar banner that has been really helpful in times like these. And then we also have like a stylistic way we can put a big red box at the top of resources if there's something that has impacted them. So for example, there was a change that's kind of for special immigrant juvenile status. If you received that status before a certain time period, but hadn't yet filed for your adjustment of status for your green card, then you need to do that by February 28th, or you're going to have to wait a really long time. And the language I got was like virtually incomprehensible to me about like from USCIS. But after putting it into an AI model, understanding it, I ran it by the immigration expert, and we came up with a plain language way to explain that, and then put that in a red banner on our fact sheet. So that's been the primary way that we're trying to figure out how do we put out reliable information that's also actionable. So we've been having a lot of conversations too about like, for especially things that are bubbling at the federal level that are likely to be litigated. Like, how do we draw the line between putting out just so much information that's overwhelmed that may not actually have any impact, or that impact may be months or years from now. So it's like a constant conversation that my staff and I are having about how to put out useful information that dispels any I don't want to call it misinformation, but that is like reliable and that doesn't induce unnecessary panic, I'll say.
Thank you. And I did want to kind of shift our discussion on design, right? I know you all kind of alluded to different aspects of design in terms of both the updates of your solutions and approaches, but I know it takes a lot of different stakeholders, people, uh, funding to pull together such a large effort. And so can you speak on that design process of how do you make something that is, can be used by all, and I mean all by different levels of, readability, different levels of technology savviness, to access your virtual hub or your legal solution?
Well, we used a UI team to do the initial design, and we did user testing with users. The first time in our first iteration, we paid no attention to the back end. So it was a total nightmare for the admins. And so in our second iteration, so don't forget, those are your users as well. So the second time we tried to pay more attention to that, and it's still actually a little bit of a nightmare, partly because for some, it's very complicated, not again because of the tool, but because there's so many factors and because we're dealing with so many programs and have very subtle differences. But I think our back end is better. So I think that's one thing I'd say keep in mind. Keep in mind, not all everyone thinks about the clients, and we should and we need to, but also think about your administrators who have to keep their listings up to date and make sure that's a reasonable. And we did incorporate the key tech principles for accessibility, and did do, as I said, did rounds of user testing and tweaked things as a result of user testing, and also have a real focus on plain language, and try to be conscious of, I'm sure we don't have very many questions, but there's always this tension because the advocates want more questions and you're saying, no, we want fewer questions. I mean, just trying to really keep things as streamlined as possible, and and not just use it as a way to gather data. So that's as I mentioned earlier, we have this very rough cut for financial eligibility. We don't even go into assets. We just are kind of, because it's just too much and too many questions and too off-putting. We also don't ask anything about immigration status. People don't like to give that information. And in Massachusetts, actually, most of our programs have a way for, we have a lot of state-funded programs which don't have it, where you can assist people regardless of their immigration status. So again, that's something that is going to be, if someone's doing an actual intake and it's important, the questions will be asked then.
And I can actually bounce off of that, because although our tools are incredibly similar, we did, as we were creating the North Carolina version of the Massachusetts tool, we did a lot of consultations with our local experts in the legal aid community. And so maybe for obvious reasons, the law is different in 2 states. And so we had to go through in the legal triage. Things are called different things. There's rights of action in Massachusetts that don't exist in North Carolina. We had to make revisions and all of that. And the truth is, our legal aid providers are pretty darn good at putting things in the way their clients talk about them. I mean, they've had just tons of experience over the years. So we had a lot of input from the local community. I would send them very long documents and ask them to give me their feedback on the triage questions that we were asking. And one fundamental difference is actually in North Carolina, because again, our community is smaller and we do not have many of the state resources that Massachusetts has. We did actually add back in the question about immigration status, because it's a really key and important filtering tool for non-LSC programs who really focus on serving those that LSC funded programs cannot. And so we wanted to provide the best the best referral for people who have immigration statuses that don't allow them to be served by legal aid or our LSE funded programs here. So that's one place where the local community's input really made a difference. You asked about the design process and being intentional about how we were serving users. One thing that I think is helpful to mention, and maybe it's kind of done as a matter of course these days, but it was really important to make sure that the website's usable on a mobile device as well as on a desktop computer. So we developed with that in mind, and did some confirmation testing just to make sure that folks on their phone would be able to walk through this thing without having to scroll this.
Jennifer, you're frozen.
Okay, I thought I was frozen. Can you all hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. I don't think we can hear Jennifer. I don't know if she can hear us.
Okay, well, until she gets back in, she really did a great job at segueing to my next question of accessibility, which when she comes back on, we'll definitely give her space to finish her response. But in terms of accessibility, some things were mentioned where it was language access. Do you all incorporate other forms of advocacy, video advocacy, modules? Oh, here's Jennifer. You're back.
Made it back.
Okay, we can hear you. So if you want to finish your point.
I'll be very brief. We're doing user testing. We're going to sit down with people in person and walk through the tool and just get feedback about how we've done. So just putting in a plug for user testing, as Rochelle mentioned too.
Yes, and I'm not sure if you were able to hear the segue, which is on something that you have brought up, perfect segue on accessibility and thinking about other forms of digital advocacy, whether through videos, different modules that allow people to understand their legal issues. I know language access was mentioned and how language access expanded the ability of the users that you're able to serve. So just thinking about accessibility and to your point, Jennifer, you mentioned the mobile accessibility, ensuring that your hub was mobile responsive and how that was beneficial in terms of expanding access. So if you all want to touch on accessibility, that would be great.
I mean, on our tool, we are making sure that it meets accessibility criteria. We're not using things like videos on the legal resource finder. I mean, we have those kind of on our legal information website, we're using things like video. And we also, on our legal information site, we have something called a screen reader where it can read the information to you. We don't have that on this tool. And this tool is, we intentionally kept it as lightweight as we could.
Okay.
We've dabbled a little bit in videos. I think the landscape has really changed in the last year or so with AI videos. The videos we made prior were really time intensive. We actually had an EJCPhila who made some really awesome animated videos for us. But they get a little bit challenging to update. There's some like lower budget ways to do like a PowerPoint video with just a voiceover where you can just update the one slide. So we use that a lot, like during the pandemic where our eviction moratorium had to be renewed every month. So we had to do a new video every month. But we found that videos are good for getting the word out about things. So they've been successful on like social media, for example, to draw people into our website. But we focused more on the written content, partly because that feels more sustainable to us right now in terms of being able to update and translate things more quickly. But I do think it is important to think about all the different ways that people learn. And we've thought about different ways to provide written content as well. So we're right now have just developed a new, we call them action plans or checklists, where we have checklists, so you can actually like check off the different items in your list, and then it refers out to other content we have on the website. So it can be like, send your landlord a notice of the repair issue. And then our hope is that in the next couple of months, we'll then be able to send them a text message reminder of like, hey, did you send that letter? Did you get your issue fixed? If not, come back to this page to take care of your next step. To try to chunk out longer legal processes so they're easier to follow for somebody who's having to navigate this stuff on their own.
Thank you. I think it was Jennifer, maybe Rochelle mentioned the role of social services and how they're good partners in terms of expanding the net of referrals. What is, I guess, the role of partnerships to the success of each of your respective models, and how are those partnerships cultivated? Jennifer?
Yeah, I'll be happy to go first. There's different audiences, I would say, different types of partnerships that are really important for a tool like the Legal Resource Finder. And it starts, I think Rochelle was just reminding us to bear in mind that as much as we talk about the word users as the members of the public, but we also have users that are part of the nonprofit community. And so the nonprofits themselves are the most vital partners to have as part of this. I don't think I would have wanted to do this if I were just trying to get information off people's websites about what kinds of cases they took and what their hours of intake were and so forth. And so those partnerships are absolutely, kind of primary for the efficacy of the tool. For us here in North Carolina, I think we had we were starting from a place of privilege, which is a coalition that already existed of nonprofit providers that we were able to call upon as our starting point for membership in the Legal Resource Finder or participation in the Legal Resource Finder. And then once we had our alliance members in the tool, we were able to take that out and share it with other providers of legal help and show them how it worked. And that was really, I would say, lucky that we had that relationship to start with. Then when you think about the partners in the community, another, two major areas of target that I think exist for users and thinking of public users are peer professionals. And that could be social services agencies, places where people who have, again, bearing in mind that goal of finding the right people with the right problems at the right time, the partners in the community that are interacting with those individuals, if they have awareness of the tool, then they can use the tool to make those connections. They don't have to remember the name or the intake number. They don't have to have the business card on their bulletin board of the way to get access to the intake line. This can be a place to kind of store it, that they can externalize that storage. And then finally, I think the other peer professional that was interesting to us is the private bar. We actually heard through our Access to Justice Commission that attorneys, well, the one that pops to mind right away has a largely Hispanic and Latino client base. And he's like, there's people who come to me all the time with legal cases that I can't take. And I never know if it's right to send them to legal aid. And I give them all the number, but I don't know if they're good. I don't know if it's a good referral. And I want it to be a good referral because I want them to get the help. And bluntly, they're my customers. I want them to come back with a good experience. So that was actually a really easy connection to make once this was envisioned, is the idea that this is a way that, private attorneys can actually figure out what's a good reference to a legal aid provider as well. So I think the number of partnerships is really only limited by your imagination. I could actually keep going. Libraries, there's a law library that I'm excited to use this because people are walking in the door looking for legal problems. Other places like that too.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would add one more is the courts. We're very fortunate that the court has put our link on their website. They have like a page on find legal help or something. So, and then they do link to this tool, so that we get a lot of referrals from the court.
And I know we are going to provide ample time for the audience to ask questions. In moving along, what role has AI and automation, the new generative AI has played in I know you all have alluded to it in various aspects, but if you want to briefly kind of summarize the role of AI and automation within your models. Jay?
Yeah. Oh, did you want to go, Rochelle?
No, yeah, you go.
Okay. So I'll say in Minnesota, right now we're doing it for our internal purposes. So for example, we'll use it to do a first draft of a fact sheet that we're developing, or for help on plain languaging one specific phrase that we're kind of stuck on. But everything we're doing with content generation for AI is going through human review first. But we are working with a group of states to hopefully create and to test out a legal AI model that will be trained on data from several states' self-help websites, that will then be able to hopefully be used in many jurisdictions. A lot of really awesome folks working on that project. And then internally, we're thinking about, so I don't know if I mentioned this, but our legal services database internally we call Loon, like the bird. So we're hoping to make a Loon bot soon that will help intake staff use AI and query the database to make sure they're asking the right questions, and be able to find referral information more quickly. So those are the three big ways. Oh, and then I should say we're interested in exploring translation, especially for Spanish, which seems to be a little bit more reliable, using AI to help with the huge amount of translation that we do for our resources.
Yeah, our tool kind of predated the big generative AI push of the last few years. We use something called Spot, which is like baby AI. So that's a tool that was developed by Suffolk University School of Law, and it's just kind of it's basically an enhanced natural language search, but it's still all based on this taxonomy, these lists of terms, which is different from what you can get with generative AI. And I know that people are starting to work with generative AI where you can end up with a situation where maybe instead of like having to check the boxes, you can have a situation where the provider just has a narrative of what kind of cases they do, and then you can query that narrative and return results. So I think that is the next generation of these tools. And I know that there's a pilot project in Missouri in a housing context where Quentin Steenhouse from Lemma Legal in Suffolk worked with them, and it's pretty cool. So I think that's definitely the next generation engine, like behind, that can power some of these results.
Yeah.
North Carolina has an awesome AI chatbot too, right, Leah?
Yeah, that's from our LSC provider, Legal Aid of North Carolina, but it's really, really great. I've tested it and tried to stump it and haven't managed to do it yet.
And I guess what are those ethical kind of considerations when not just thinking about the AI, but just about the tool in general? What comes to mind is security, privacy, and again, we alluded to some of them and throughout this conversation, but just kind of placing that in context about some of those ethical considerations that you all are thinking about when pushing out your models or when improving them. I see, Rochelle, you are unmuted, so I'll give you space.
Sure. Well, I mean, our tool, we don't collect any private information. Everything is completely anonymous. So, I'm not I don't think I'm not particularly, I think this hasn't been something that's been too challenging just because it's such a completely anonymous tool.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a very smart ethical decision that you all had to make in terms of whether to capture data, whether to not capture data. Yeah.
But I think definitely when it comes to using generative AI, something we'll all need to be mindful of is if you have an open text box for somebody to feed their information into this model, like making sure there's both clear understanding on the end user's side about what's happening to that data, and that as the person with the tool, that you understand how whatever engine is running your AI bot, like how they're storing that data, whether that data is being shared elsewhere, to make sure any sensitive data isn't then being shared out when somebody else puts in a query that might relate to that. So it's definitely a lot of ethics to consider beyond just kind of, can the tool provide accurate information?
It's a really
Um,
good point.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I do want to give space to, I know we have a good amount of attendees, to questions that they might have. So please feel free to ask questions either by raising your hand, putting that question in the chat bot. If anyone has questions. Also, too, following the webinar, I would like to ask for our students who are on the call to stick around. So any questions, burning questions that you may have around? Ian? Feel free to unmute yourself and you
Hi,
can.
can you hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. Hi. Well, it's so lovely to hear all of you speak. Thank you so much for all your times today. So a few of you spoke about the use of AI in translation, especially when it comes to Spanish language legal help for like legal documents for Hispanic individuals looking for legal representation. And I guess, especially because AI is such a new technology, and with a lot of its applications still unknown, I wanted to see how exactly you like saw AI working in other areas in your legal work, and then how you see that moving and going forward.
Well, we haven't used AI for translation yet. I mean, all of our translations are still done by humans, although, or at least human review. I think that's like a first step that some people are doing, where maybe the initial translations may be done through AI, or the reality is a lot of translation companies have some kind of, they're using a translation data memory database. But but I think it's really important to have the human review at this stage. And also, you know, there's so many different dialects and you want consistency across your translations. So I'll be very interested to see what my fellow programs do, but so far we haven't done that yet.
Yeah, Rochelle, we're in the same place. Like, one idea I've heard talked about for the future is there's a tool called Notebook LM that's a Google tool. And I heard someone speaking about it that like really spurred me for what could be for legal aid websites in the future once things are very, very thoroughly vetted and tested. But is that you have a body of information, and then you have an end user who can interact with it in whatever language they choose. Like eventually, maybe we get to a point where that's reliable enough, where as the content provider, you're making sure that you have the reliable, accurate information, and maybe it doesn't even need to be in plain language. And then you have the users who can interact with it and ask questions about it, and the language that they're most comfortable with, and the dialect that they're most comfortable with. I'm by no means enough of an expert to know like when that would happen or if it will happen to the degree that, we might all want it to. But I think at least for the languages that are being more commonly used to interact with AI models, and I'll bracket that very specifically, I think that does seem like a feasible thing within the next few years. That's really exciting for me in terms of us being able to provide reliable information and connections for people.
I'm definitely a novice. I consider myself like a casual user of AI for mostly personal purposes, and always as a starting point. The idea of doing something without human review feels really shaky to me at this stage, with what I've seen. But the one thing that's helpful for me as a novice that I've heard as I've been to, presentations about this is the idea of closed universe. AI tools that rely on a closed universe so that you're confident that where the information that's sourcing the answer is from this closed universe, and you're not getting things that either would be inappropriate or non-reliable or made up or whatever the problem might be on hand. And so that's been one thing that, as I've talked with other people who probably are even more skeptical than I am about AI in the future, having that as a model, or at least one of the major pieces of information that I share about the future of AI, that's been key. And thinking about things like that, LIA, LIA, the Legal Information Assistant, that our legal aid providers developed, how they can do that with confidence is by closing off the universe that the information's pulling from. So it's information that they've provided exclusively. There's no other sources of information. There's no, it's got to be manually updated, which is both a pro and a con, but it's really important so that there's not information being pulled that would make us all uncomfortable about turning around and basing our reliability on that.
Yeah, and just to add to it, you all may, for those who have used some of these generative AI tools, they have been known to hallucinate, meaning make up things. And so I think what Jennifer alluded to are the RAG models, which is the retrieval augmented generation models, which creates a closed box universe of the data that you want to have in that the generative AI is using to feed the model. Harvey AI is one that's used at many law firms, but with the kind of launch of tools like DeepSeek, people have the power to create their own kind of open source RAG models. And so there's definitely, I think, potential to see what that looks like. But again, to echo on all of the panelists, definitely needs to be human review. And just even thinking about like a project, I worked on in Alaska, many of the languages are oral and not kind of text-based. And so taking into consideration, many of the languages throughout our nation that aren't kind of text-based languages, and how do we kind of coop in the need for those different types of languages. And so, yeah, I think there's potential, but also kind of a side of caution, as you all kind of demonstrated. Really great question, Ian. Other questions? I think I've seen someone hit the chat. Let me see.
No, that was just Rochelle linking us to some really great
Okay.
resources.
Any other questions, comments, reactions?
Yeah, so I have a random one. So what was the process in publicizing this information to your local communities that this tool actually existed? What did that look like?
Well, it's an ongoing process. I mean, we our tool had actually, we had an existing URL that had been around for like 15 years or something like that. So we redirected things. So we had a lot of built-in, history with our URL. And we did a lot of just a big publicity campaigns around Massachusetts, and we still need to continue to publicize it. Social media, I mean, it does come up in Google searches, although Google is getting a little bit more challenging as they push out AI. So for us, it's been a lot of trying to get links and trying to get other sources to make sure that when a place like the court is saying how to find a lawyer, that they're linking to our tool. But it's ever, it's constant. And the other thing, and I will say that kind of gets back to the issue about working with providers versus individuals. And in a lot of ways, the individual, hopefully, their legal problems are one-offs or two-offs, but not continual. So, but as opposed to a provider who is working with a body of clients and is going to be going back to the tool again and again and again. I have to say that's one of the reasons, like, people had asked us whether we wanted to make this an app, and we didn't. I mean, I didn't think of this as a tool that people were going to download onto their phones to have all the time, because most people are not necessarily using it all the time.
Yeah, we started also again, we're coming up on our first anniversary. So a lot of 2024 was still in refining and doing outreach to additional providers to join the Legal Resource Finder. So the users really have focused, because we are, again, I think, Rochelle, that court partnership is so key. And so because the court links to our Alliance website, we put a big tell us about your legal problem that takes you directly to the Legal Resource Finder. So the kind of the workflow for somebody looking for help, it kind of naturally follows to the Legal Resource Finder from those links. And I think getting those links is really key. This is not particularly profound, but we've created a flyer that's easy to email around to different providers, because I like to do person-to-person contact, but it's obviously time consuming. And so one of my tasks for second quarter of this year is going to be doing a lot of direct contact to the social services providers, trying to find places that I can give a short presentation, or I don't think I'll table, but that would be an option. If I had staff, I could send them out to table. I do not. So yeah, finding those places to multiply the impact, like Rochelle mentioned, I think is really key.
Yeah, and just one more, another key link for us has been on the different legal aid websites. Often, even in their find a lawyer, within their own websites, they'll link out to the Legal Resource Finder, because if someone's landed on their website and they're not in the geography, they'll say, find a lawyer, or sometimes they're even saying, before you apply to us, check the Legal Resource Finder and make sure you're eligible. And then the other big group, I think Jennifer or Jay, or maybe both mentioned before, is librarians. We've made presentations at our statewide library functions.
Say one outreach strategy we just started is we have been developing a series of immigration focused fact sheets in a number of different languages. And I just shipped out business cards that have QR codes that go to both self-help info and find a lawyer info on our website, that the immigration providers in Minnesota can take to, they're doing, just as you can imagine, tons of outreach right now and just out there in the community all the time. So they wanted to have business cards to provide to people, because they can't help with a lot of the stuff that people need help with, because they just are so limited in their capacity compared to the need. So those business cards will be something that they can hand out to folks who they know will need that information, and then they can get a direct link to the resource they're looking for.
Thank you. And I think this will be my last question. I'm sorry, because Jennifer, you actually mentioned something really important about being one staffed, right? It's you and you're the one going out into the field. So how are your staffing structures, right? And how does that work within the work that you actually have going on? Sorry, Jennifer.
Oh, I'm happy to dive in. Before this was supposed to be 60% of my time. not only the legal resource finder, but all of my staffing capacity as director of the Equal Justice Alliance here in North Carolina. Bluntly, it didn't happen. My time ended up being donated from the Access to Justice Commission, which is my sponsoring organization. And this year I've actually been able to go to 100% of the time. However, that incorporates, not just the legal resource finder, but many other tasks. And so I will just go ahead and say I don't think my tool could have existed without the generosity of Rochelle and the Massachusetts Legal Resource Finder, because that iterative collaboration is such a hallmark of our nonprofit community. And I feel very fortunate to be able to, again, stand on her shoulders directly, and then also hopefully pay that forward as well. And then obviously like building in the automations in terms of automated reminders about updating folks' entries to reflect the accurate intake structures as those change. Building that kind of automated approach to it is really key, so that it's not waiting on me to get around to it on my to-do list.
Well, thank you. I know we're coming up on time. Okay. I know we're coming up on time, so I wanted to thank all of our panelists for their time, their energy, their efforts. Really great discussion. Thank the Bar Foundation and the Equal Justice Center who put this on. And thank Brandy, of course, for always putting together such really great events and making it easy for us. Thank the audience. I really appreciate you all for showing up. I'm happy to share my email in the chat if anyone wants to follow up and with us. And yeah, really appreciate any kind of final words you all want to share as we close our session out.
Well, I'll just say I think that a tool like this is a really empathetic thing to put into place. It's really just reflecting the reality that people are scared and panicked and going through a difficult time, and anything that we as a community can do to make it easier for them is a real positive thing to do.
Okay, and so yeah, thank you all.